Our scripture this morning comes from Matthew chapter 2, verses 1 through 23, and I'm reading from the New Revised Standard Version. In the time of King Herod, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem asking, "Where is the child who has been born King of the Jews? For we observed his star at its rising and have come to pay him homage." When King Herod heard this, he was frightened, and all Jerusalem with him. And calling together all the chief priests and scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Messiah was to be born. They told him, "In Bethlehem of Judea, for so it has been written by the prophet. And you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah. For from you shall come a ruler who is shepherd to my people Israel." When Herod secretly called for the wise men and learned from them the exact time when the star had appeared, then he sent them to Bethlehem, saying, "Go and search diligently for the child, and when you have found him, bring me word so that I may also go and pay him homage." When they had heard the king, they set out, and there ahead of them went the star that they had seen at its rising, until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw the star had stopped, they were overwhelmed with joy. On entering the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother, and they knelt down and paid him homage. Then, opening their treasure chest, they offered him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they left for their own country by another road. Now after they left, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream and said, "Get up, take the child and his mother, and flee to Egypt, and remain there until I tell you, for Herod is about to search for the child to destroy him." Then Joseph got up, took the child and his mother by night, and went to Egypt, and remained there until the death of Herod. This was to fulfill what had been spoken by the Lord through the prophet, "Out of Egypt I have called my son." When Herod saw that he had been tricked by the wise men, he was infuriated, and he sent and killed all the children in and around Bethlehem who were 2 years old and under, according to the time that he had learned from the wise men. Then was fulfilled what had been spoken through the prophet Jeremiah. A voice was heard in Ramah, wailing and loud lamentation, Rachel weeping for her children. She refused to be consoled because they are no more. When Herod died, an angel of the Lord suddenly appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt and said, "Get up, take the child and his mother, and go to the land of Israel, for those who were seeking the child's life are dead." Then Joseph got up, took the child and his mother, and went to the land of Israel. But when he heard that Archelaus was ruling over Judea in place of his father Herod, he was afraid to go there. And after being warned in a dream, he went away to the district of Galilee. There he made his home in a town called Nazareth, so that what had been spoken through the prophets might be fulfilled. He will be called a Nazarene. The word of God for the people of God.
It is good to be together on this day after we have completed these days of Christmas. The tree came down at our house last night. I don't know if yours was already down or still yet to be down. We do a live tree. It was pretty dry. And so when I was yanking off the ornaments, and some of them I had to yank, they like fell on top of one another. It was quite the adventure. But it's good. It's good to move through those days and simply remember that the celebration of the birth of Jesus Christ is hard to contain in a single day. It takes a season. And the church calendar is like that in so many different kinds of ways, not only with Epiphany, but Lent is a season, and Holy Week and Easter is a long season as well, to give us a sense of the story, not just a day here and a day there, but the ongoing story. And it's a story that consistently invites us to response, right? To respond to what God is doing in our lives. And so the response time near the end of our worship service each and every week, it's something that I think is good. I think it's something that most Baptist churches do, and maybe even something of a feature of certain Baptist or free church expressions have that kind of opportunity to respond, give each person each Sunday the opportunity to act in some way on God's leading in your life. It's an opportunity to respond if God is moving in your heart, right? To move towards something, and maybe that is a decision for the very first time to say, I trust in what God has done in Jesus can change me and save me and set me on a new way of life. Maybe it's the decision toward baptism or to be members of the life of a particular congregation, a church. Maybe it's something in the sermon that caused you to want to respond, or something that the choir sang. Even a line from a hymn can sometimes grab your attention and elicit that response. Or very often, if we're honest, we come into worship already with that sense of a holy nudge that God is moving in our hearts in some form or fashion. And we come in with the idea that we're about to respond to something, because I always seek to assume that God is always at work, always calling and convicting, always encouraging and correcting, always comforting, or maybe when needed, discomforting. So time and space for response, I think, is good to have, because I think response is consistently at the heart of the gospel stories. When you read these gospel stories, Jesus evokes response consistently. We might even say that Jesus provokes response at times. And it's all kinds, right? People follow, people turn away. People gather close to hear, and some no longer want to hear any more that he has to say and have to go the other way. People tear open roofs to get their friend down into the room where he's at so that Jesus can heal them. People, have all kinds of responses to what Jesus has said or done. I mean, there's a bunch of pigs that run off a cliff. I guess that's kind of a response to Jesus when suddenly they realize they're in presence, this demonic activity in the presence of the Son of God. I remember at the resurrection, Mary Magdalene embraced the resurrected Jesus, a response to the living Jesus before her. All kinds of responses. And there's two key responses in Matthew 2 that I want us to look at this morning. I think Matthew 2 really sets up all the responses that you see throughout the rest of the Gospel of Matthew. In Matthew 2, the responses of the Magi and King Herod are really emblematic of the kinds of responses that you see through all four of the Gospel accounts. And there are many varied responses, but these two have something of a sort of a core to them, which you see across the whole of the Gospels. So there's more to talk about in Matthew 2 than what I'm going to talk about this morning, but I want to focus especially on the responses of the Magi and the response of King Herod. We'll start with the Magi. Magi respond to Jesus in what way? Overwhelming joy, kneeling in his presence to pay him homage. That word homage meaning honor, and I think even the words praise and worship can fit in that context as they kneel before Jesus. And of course, they respond with the beautiful gifts that signal their understanding that Jesus was a king. Now, friends, we don't know much of anything about these Magi. Often they get translated in the text, as you heard this morning, as wise men. We often depict them as kings, like the hymn that we sang, We Three Kings. Often in the depictions of our creches, they are kings or dressed in royal kinds of fashion. We typically think about there being three of them, right? Because there are three gifts that are given. There's no indication of how many were there. It could have been 2 or 17 or 43. But the three gifts, we tend to put one in one hand of each of the three wise men. What we do know is that they are from a bit of a ways away, from the outside, from whatever the margins were at that time, that's where they were coming from, safely far enough away to assume that they're Gentiles, which is a huge part of Matthew's gospel, to recognize that these Gentiles are the ones arriving to celebrate, the ones arriving to kneel down in homage, and the one bringing gifts to Jesus. These ones from the outside. It's they who are coming. It's them. It's those people. Those people are the ones arriving to celebrate Jesus. Those people throughout the gospel are ones who come to Jesus with joy, with wonder and worship, with the gifts and graces and the brokenness and pains of their lives. It's those people. It's those people like fishermen and tax collectors who are now the followers and disciples of Jesus. You may remember the scene after Matthew begins to follow Jesus. He gathers a lot of his tax collecting friends and other sinners, and they eat together with Jesus. And the Pharisees immediately approach the disciples and say, why does Jesus eat with those people, with tax collectors and sinners? And Jesus simply reminds them it's those who are sick, who recognize they need God's healing, right? Who need mercy. Not you folks who've got everything all figured out. Those people like the lepers and the woman caught in adultery that other people thought were better off dead. In some eyes, those folks were better off dead. And they're the ones responding to the healing touch of Jesus and the word of forgiveness of Jesus. Those people. Did your parents ever warn you about those people? Don't hang out with those people. Don't be around those people. There was a dinner party that Jesus attended in Luke's gospel. And one of those people, a woman that everybody knew her reputation, apparently they knew her story of some way or some fashion. But anyway, she comes and anoints Jesus' feet and cries upon his feet and washes his feet with her hair, dries his feet with her hair. And the immediate response of everybody at the dinner party is, if Jesus knew what kind of woman that was, right, the reputation of this woman, he would be utterly offended by her presence and even more offended by what she's doing. And they're just shaking their heads at the situation. That Jesus isn't offended by those people. Maybe Mary and Joseph didn't teach Jesus well enough about those people, right? Or maybe Mary and Joseph were those people because after all, they were from Nazareth, right? Those people like the Magi. As I mentioned, I think the Magi's response in many ways sets up the way so many respond in the gospel, in Matthew, but even across the other gospels as well. The way fishermen and tax collectors and lepers and sinners and everyone else pushed to the margins responded to Jesus. I once read an article about Jim Cymbala. Jim Cymbala is the pastor of Brooklyn Tabernacle Church. I don't know if he's still the pastor there or not. It's probably a little advanced in years if he is still the pastor, but a significant ministry that he's had there. I don't know that he and I would agree on around everything theologically, but I loved his ministry and some of his writings around what they did at the Brooklyn Tabernacle there. But one of the things that Jim Cymbala said simply was that as he began pastoring, he prayed, Lord, bring those that nobody else wants to us. That was his prayer for the church. Bring those that nobody else wants. Nobody wants them in their presence. Nobody wants them, in their restaurants. Nobody wants them in their church. Bring them to us. And he began to sort of build his ministry on that notion. He prayed, Lord, bring those people, right? Bring those people. And may the church embrace and welcome those people. I certainly can't think of a better prayer for any church, including Temple Baptist Church, than that. Because I think sometimes we forget that we are those people, right? We are the Gentiles. We are the ones who are on the outside of the story. We're not the ones gathered around King Herod. If we're anybody, we're the ones in the caravan with the Magi, which I'm okay with, because the ones in the caravan with the Magi are the ones who are coming with overwhelming joy. Right? They're the ones coming to kneel down in recognition of who Jesus is. They're the ones coming to bring gifts and to celebrate. I think I'd rather be with those people myself. And then there's King Herod. King Herod's response. King Herod responded to Jesus with fear and violence. As you heard in the text, his immediate response is fright. He's frightened at the news that these strange magi bring, that somebody in Bethlehem has been born a king. And kings do get frightened when they hear about other kings in their jurisdiction being born, right? That's a little unnerving for them to hear that. But he's frightened, and then he gathers around others because apparently the news frightens everybody in Jerusalem. But in King Herod's story, his fright then turns to his sort of schemes to try to figure out, hey, look, you tell me where Jesus is because I want to go too and pay him homage, when what King Herod wants to do is go and deal with Jesus. But then when the wise men ghost King Herod, now that's a 2024 way of saying what they did, right? I don't think they would have used that language of ghosting King Herod. But that's what they do, because the angel says, hey, don't go back to him, go out another way. So instead of sending a text back to Herod, hey, we found Jesus, they delete his number and they go back, which infuriates Herod. So his response moves from fear to violence. And not just any violence, but unthinkable violence against children. I'm always a little shaken by this story, right? This part of the story especially, remembering that the arrival of Jesus included the deaths of these children in Bethlehem. Right, the arrival of Jesus, in which we sing Silent Night, Holy Night, all is calm, all is bright. A little while after is not that. It's not silent, but it's the wailing and loud lamentation. It's not calm, it's the refusal of consolation. It's certainly not bright, but it was terribly, terribly dark. Herod's response of violence. He resisted the news, and again, he resisted it to the point of violence. Think about the other stories in the gospel like that. You may remember in Luke's gospel, Jesus preaches in his hometown of Nazareth, opens up the scroll to Isaiah 61, talks about the Spirit of the Lord being upon him. He's ordained to step into this prophetic and messianic ministry that Isaiah is talking about in 61. He says, today in your hearing, this scripture is fulfilled. And he goes on to talk about how he will fulfill it. And they are so angry that they push Jesus up the hill there in Nazareth with every intention of throwing him off the cliff. He preaches and they want to throw him off the cliff. In John's gospel, Jesus starts talking about, Abraham, and before Abraham was, I am, and he says, my Father and I are one. And as soon as he says that, they pick up stones to kill him on the spot. There's a lot of responding of violence in the Gospels. And ultimately, what King Herod began to do was completed when they arrested Jesus and handed him over to the Romans. You may remember they refused to accept the murderer and insurrectionist Barabbas in Jesus' place. Instead, they said, we'll take Barabbas. What do I do with Jesus? Pilate says, crucify him, crucify him. And they scoffed and they ridiculed Jesus on the cross. Listen, in a bit of beautiful irony, on the cross where Jesus was nailed, above him was the sign that said what? This is Jesus, King of the Jews. The Magi arrived asking, where is the one born King of the Jews? Well, here he is, nailed to a Roman cross. And it certainly looked like the violence that Herod wanted to enact won the day, until on the third day Jesus rose again, defeated violence and defeated its death in the resurrection. And so again, in a kind of full circle way, in Matthew chapter 28, The gospel story shows those who are standing around the resurrected Jesus, they are amazed and they worship him. They worship him. Here come the strange magi in chapter 2, kneeling down, worshiping the baby Jesus, all the way to Matthew chapter 28, where the resurrected Jesus is surrounded by his followers, and they worship him. From start to finish, Jesus evoked a response. All kinds of responses, but always a response. So one of our consistent and obedient responses to the gospel of Jesus is the bread and cup of the table before us, the bread and cup of the Lord's Supper. Responding to the gift of God that is Jesus, the gift of God that is the Son of God in the flesh, the Son of God who willingly gave his body for the world. We eat the bread, right? It is a response of worship and thanksgiving. Responding to the gift of grace and mercy that is Jesus, the grace of his atonement, the mercy of his sacrificial gift of his life, and the shedding of his blood, we drink the cup. In drinking the cup, it is a response of worship and thanksgiving.